Hey, Mike, this is Kevin Albanese. Just a quick question on the procurement of the PPE and whatnot. Is it like every agency on its own, or is the state helping coordinate a unified effort to acquire PPE?
There is some coordination, but it's very tough right now. All vendors and even the folks that are coordinating with through the state, it's just tough to get supplies. It's getting easier, and everything is we just try to prioritize everything, and the state is as well. So, but things are improving. We are getting more. It's easier for the staff to procure these items, but some of the things are just still delayed. So we just keep looking for new sources. Hope that answers your question.
It does. I guess my question is, are we basically competing with other agencies, other state agencies, to get PPE?
At some level, yes. Everyone's just trying to get their items.
That's disappointing.
Any other board comment? I want to apologize. Thank you, Mike, for your report. I do want to apologize for not for mispronouncing your your name. Again, we're working remotely with no visual, so please bear with me. Hearing no other board comment, Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comment on this item.
Okay. Next is the Information Technology Administration update, which begins on page 57 of your packet. I will turn it over to Jason Perez, Information Technology Chief, to provide a brief update. Jason.
Thank you, Board Chair, and good morning, everyone. On page 57 begins the Information Technology update. The IT division continues to show cost savings. A few of the highlights are an approximate 40% reduction to the Department of Technology charges between fiscal years 18-19 and 19-20. This ongoing savings is important as there will be additional cost as we move to increase IT functionality and automation of processes. I'm going to move past the online renewal update for a moment and continue with highlighting cost-saving measures with the information security and risk on page 58. CSLB IT continues to partner with the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Information Systems in developing a shared IT services model. This model will allow CSLB to share major IT infrastructure costs versus CSLB implementing its own IT solutions. The initial phase of the shared services models includes network infrastructure and security services. CSLB IT is working on remediation efforts with DCA Security on the military audit conducted in February of 2019. Some of our remediation efforts were delayed due to transition of staff resources to assist CSLB employees with working remotely. IT staff efforts will now shift to remediations of these outlined tasks in preparation of our next military audit scheduled for March of 2021. Next, I will move back to the online renewal, which is noted on page 57. CSLB implemented online renewals in April of 2020. Online renewals continue to be a big success for CSLB, and it allows for 100% of our licensees to pay their renewal online. At this time, over 50% of the renewal payments are processed online. Through end of August, we have processed 22,756 online renewal transactions. Continuing to page 60 is a Gantt chart of IT projects for 2020. To finish off the remainder of 2020, IT development staff are working with our enforcement division with the goal to provide licensees the ability to pay citations online. We anticipate completing this in late December of 2020. After implementation of the online citations, IT will then turn its focus on the implementations of the few of the legislative changes. At this time, we are in the pre-planning phases for two bills. One, outsourcing of exam administration, and the second is the retroactive renewal. This concludes my IT updates.
Thank you, Jason. This was informational only. Is there any board comment? Hearing none. Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comment on this item.
Very well then. Next is agenda item D5, the 2019-2021 strategic plan update, which begins on page 61 of your board packet. Tanya, please update the board.
Thank you, David. So today we're providing you the 2019 through 2021 strategic plan objectives, where we're just requesting a revised target date for completion. Those objectives are outlined on page 64 through 69 of your board packet. And each objective shows the current target date that was set by the board back in 2018, and highlighted are our new proposed target dates. And some of those dates are also being requested to be changed to ongoing when it lends itself to ongoing activities and not really a hard completion date. So as David mentioned earlier, COVID-19 has affected our daily operations, which currently equates to about 25% reduction in available staff and staff work hours. And so unfortunately, work on these objectives has slowed. So today we would just ask for the board's consideration in approving these proposed target dates. Division chiefs will update their respective committee members at the next committee meetings, and they're also available to answer any questions on their division objectives. So that completes my update. I'll turn it back over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Are there any comments? At this time, I will entertain a motion.
So moved to adopt the recommendations.
Augie Beltran, second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Any comments? Rick, are there any public comments?
No public comments on this item.
Felice, can you take roll call?
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Lola Richardson,
Aye.
Jim Wayne,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer, Nancy, absent, Mary Tucker,
Aye.
motion passes.
Thank you, Felice. On page 69, you will find the staff recommendation, which asks the board to approve the proposed 2019-2000, never mind. Let's see. We move to agenda item E, the enforcement portion of our agenda, which begins on page 75. I will now turn it over to Enforcement Committee Chair Kevin Albanese and Deputy Chief Enforcement Jesse Flores.
Thank you, Chair. If everybody wants to turn to page 75 of your packet, that begins the enforcement program update. I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief of Enforcement Jesse Flores to provide a summary of the implementation of the expense reduction strategies and a vacancy update. Jesse, you're on.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, on page 75 of your packet begins the enforcement program update. And at the top of the page is listed the board approved expense reduction strategy. And I'd like to mention a couple of those. For the AG's office, I'm happy to report that we were able to come in under that monthly $580,000 for July. This is just a collaborative effort between our enforcement case management staff and the AG's office by identifying opportunities to not only save costs, but resolve matters quickly, which benefits all parties. Moving on to arbitrations, while there is not sufficient amount of time to compare data to measure arbitration costs, I will mention that compared to this time last fiscal year, we have noticed a reduction in arbitration costs. If this pattern continues, we will have the savings we are seeking. However, if we do notice a spike, we will implement processes that will keep us on track. Additionally, at the June 5th meeting, the board approved process changes by which complaints with a financial injury of under $10,000 are referred to the bond or small claims. On page 76, you can read the notice that is on our website informing the public of this process. We have already seen unhappy responses, as you probably heard earlier in public comment, but we've also received written ones of not happy with, what we're doing with some of these, with what we're doing with this process. We have created an action code that will allow us to monitor and track and report to future meetings. As for staffing, Dave mentioned the number of vacancies, but I will let you know that we are continuously looking to identify priorities and filling certain vacancies and ensure that we are meeting our critical public protection mandate. And finally, my enforcement management team are developing working comprehensive training for our staff, considering COVID and all the challenges that imposes with webinars with the Attorney General's office. We have live WebEx, Zoom meetings with other staff to identify training needs, and in-office training for onboarding new employees who have just been hired. So that, Kevin, concludes my enforcement update.
Wonderful, Jesse. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the enforcement team working under these current conditions and cuts. Back to the board book, starting at page 76, there's a few investigative highlights that I'd like to call your attention to. First, it's important to understand our enforcement program serves a vital role in protecting the public when they are most vulnerable, such as during the time following the event of a natural disaster, whether it be earthquake or, as we're dealing with now, fire. This was demonstrated during the investigation at Chiramonte Construction and Plumbing of Tulare for defrauding survivors of the 2017 Tubbs fire that devastated parts of Santa Rosa and Sonoma counties. This licensee, Mr. Chiramonte, his wife and daughter entered into multiple contracts, took large dollars in advance of work being performed, and performed little or no work. The estimated financial injury was approximately $1 million, and the Sonoma County DA's office is still to this day reporting that they are receiving calls from potential victims. The district attorney in Sonoma County has filed nearly 60 criminal charges in this case. Kudos to our peace officers who took the lead role in this investigation and effectively partnered with local prosecutors. On page 77, you find the summary of CSLB's and Alameda County DA's office investigation that resulted in the revocation of Roto Hero Plumbing, their license. CSLB receives leads and complaints from consumers, industry members, and even board members. In the spirit of protecting the integrity of the construction industry, we also recognize that most contractors are doing a great job. However, in this case against Roto Hero, the investigation revealed that they were taking advantage of some of California's most vulnerable homeowners by misleading them into signing contracts for repairs that were not even necessary to begin with. Our enforcement division, in partnership with local prosecutors, took 6 administrative actions, identifying a total financial injury in excess of $125,000. And on July 31st, 2020, Roto Hero's license was revoked. This all is informational only at this time. There is no action required by the board. Before I ask for any further board comment, I just want to reflect back to the Chico meeting that we did last year with the fire. People had the opportunity to tour Paradise. We're dealing with these natural disasters again. And as board members, I just ask that we always remember why we're here. We're here for the consumer, and we're here to protect the consumer, and especially the most vulnerable. And these fires in most everybody's backyard, it seems they're not discriminating where they are. Notwithstanding the lack of resources, notwithstanding COVID, our efforts and our job could not be more important than now. Is there any board comment? Hearing no board comment, is there any public comment, Rick?
No comment on this item.
Okay, all right, moving on to page 85, the Solar Task Force update. This agenda item highlights the continued partnership between the CSLB, the California Public Utilities Commission, and Department of Business Oversight in combating fraud in the residential solar industry. This details some of the enforcement strategies employed by CSLB in this unique industry. At this time, I would like to turn this over to Registrar Fote to provide some additional insight. Mr. Registrar.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Just a real quick update on what we've been working on with the Public Utility Commission, specifically Commissioner Martha Guzman Chavez and the Business Oversight Commission, and that commissioner is Manuel Alvarez. We've had a strategy to reduce consumer complaints. That strategy, as of at this time, hasn't been as successful as we hoped. We're still receiving 90, on average, 90 consumer filed solar complaints monthly. On a positive note, last fiscal year, that being July 1st through June 31st of 2020, we were able to settle 176 solar licensee complaints. That resulted in $2.4 million in restitution. Unfortunately, we were not able to settle all complaints, and 122 solar complaints were referred to either administrative, legal action, or criminal prosecution. And what you see on those type of referrals is that consumers are not always made whole. And what's troubling is that we do have solar contractors that are writing home improvement contracts. If solar is being installed on a residence, the contract must comply with home improvement contract requirements. That means your down payment is limited to $1,000, and any subsequent payments have to be directly referenced to the value of work performed. Unfortunately, some solar contractors have developed a payment schedule. They call it the CAP payment schedule. It's consumer approved plan. And that means that once the consumer approves the plans, they'll try to receive, and many times do receive, up to 80% of the contract price. And this can create a significant problem when the contractor doesn't perform the work, maybe files bankruptcy or just simply abandons jobs. And it's caused a lot of consumers to be financially harmed. What you will find in your packet is an overview of a program that we're working with the PUC on to review the interconnection packets. So when a contractor is hooking up to the grid, they have to submit contract documents that include the notice requirements to confirm that they are licensed, the salesperson is registered to the utility before that connection is made. We reviewed, I think it was 157 of those packets, and we found that 90% of the contracts didn't comply with home improvement contract law. Quite staggering. So this industry is unique in a couple ways. We're seeing widespread front loading of contracts, taking excessive deposits, and also lenders in some situations are paying directly to the contractor. You don't see that in other home improvement contracts. That's causing a lot of harm to consumers. So how best to help these consumers, many of whom have liens on their house, they've paid out $20,000 or $30,000, they don't have a solar system, contractor can't be found. Well, the PUC is looking at a program, that's why I appreciate the opportunity to present this today, whereby they would create a residential recovery fund. It's modeled after the recovery fund in Nevada. And it would be based upon assessments made when you hook up to the electrical grid. That's how the fund would be created. It would pay out when the board has taken a final action. I mean, we've written a citation, we filed an accusation, we've taken a legal action against the contractor, and that legal action has an order of correction that's not been complied with. At that point, the fund could provide restitution to consumers. This is a PUC-sponsored measure. It's not one that I'm bringing to you to sponsor in any way. I just want to make sure that you're aware that as staff, we are providing information to the PUC in furtherance of them establishing the Solar Residential Recovery Fund. So Kevin, that would be my update, and I'll answer any questions.
Are there any board questions or comments? I don't think I see any. Rick, do we have any public question or comments?
No comments on this item.
All right. Moving forward, on page 89 of your packet begins the content, including the workers' compensation insurance statistics, enforcement strategies, and ultimately CSLB's legislative proposal for mandated workers' compensation. As background, in 2017, the board established a two-person advisory committee which consisted of former member Ed Lang and myself to develop strategies to address workers' compensation insurance avoidance, which involved collaborating with other industries, increasing enforcement, and discussing legislative solutions. CSLB conducted several meetings between 2018 and 2020 with state fund State Compensation Insurance Fund, California Department of Insurance, and various construction industry stakeholders to discuss solutions to this problem. Yet, despite our efforts, the number of workers' compensation exemptions on file remained consistent. As a result, we are seeking legislation to mandate workers' compensation for specific license classifications to protect workers and consumers as part of the board-approved 2019 to 2021 strategic plan. At a January 2020 meeting of industry, CSLB staff and 2 members of the board's current Workers' Comp Advisory Committee, staff presented a proposal to mandate workers' compensation insurance for 3 classifications likely to have employees. These were the C8 concrete contractor, the C20 HVAC contractor, and the D49 tree service contractors. Representatives of these industries were present at the meeting and supported the measure going forward. If you turn to page 100, there is a potential fiscal impact of mandating workers' compensation insurance broken out. Based on the data acquired after the implementation of mandatory workers' compensation insurance for roofing contractors, we can assume 10% of licensees may not obtain licensure if all classifications are mandated to carry this coverage. Additionally, on page 101, you see the estimated cost to licensees in premium. Of course, there will be a cost to licensees when procuring workers' compensation, but this is not a new cost of doing business and frankly should have been being paid all along by contractors as required by California law. If the board approves the Workers' Compensation Advisory Committee's recommendation, the legislative process will begin with Chief of Leg Mike J. seeking an author for the bill as laid out in pages 103 to 107 of your packet. If all goes as planned, the bill would move through the legislature and finally to the governor's desk for signature and implementation on January 1, 2022. The Workers' Compensation Advisory Committee's recommendation is to recommend that the full board direct staff to pursue legislation that would immediately require workers' compensation insurance for C8 contractors, C8 concrete contractors, C20 HVAC contractors, and D49 tree service contractors, and then within 3 years require workers' compensation for every actively licensed contractor. So that is the recommendation. That do we need a motion for that, or does it come as a fully formed motion from the 2-person committee?
That's Dave Foe. Jason Hurtado, could you comment on that?
Either way, can I get a motion? Is there a motion from
Beltran? I so move the recommendation of the committee. Wait, second.
Okay, so we have a motion and second. Before calling for a vote, is there any board comment to the proposal? Rick, is there any public comment to the proposal?
Excuse me, we just had one. We do have one public comment. Phil Vermeulen, please go ahead with your comment. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. This is Phil Vermeulen, representing Contractor Licensing Center and the Flasher Barricade Association. This is something that's been near and dear to my heart for years. I think it is long overdue, and I enthusiastically applaud the board and urge everybody to vote aye for this measure, and in 3 years go forward with requiring workers' comp for everyone. It's long overdue. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chair, no other public comments. We do notice that we believe Frank Altamora, board member, does have his hand up as well.
Yeah, having joined the board fairly recently, I'm wondering if staff could provide some light on why there was an original exemption for contractors who did not have employees.
Well, this is Dave Foe. Mike Chemnesky, have you ever looked into the alleged history on the ability to file an exemption from workers' comp? Jim Nessie's a bit of our historian here.
Yes, I went back to the very beginning on all of these statutes, and all I can say is that it was always there. The rule has always been that if you have employees, regardless of CSLB completely aside, as Kevin mentioned, the law is if you have employees, you have to have workers' comp, end of story. What has always been authorized at CSLB is if a licensee is certifying, which is a promise on a document, on a form, if the licensee is certifying to the registrar that they do not have any employees, they are therefore exempt from workers' compensation coverage in California. That is what has always been authorized to be provided. The licensee could always promise to the board that they don't have employees. But what this document and this packet explains is that year after year after year after year, what is it? Approximately 55% of licensed contractors claim they do not have employees. And our research efforts and our enforcement efforts have indicated that is probably not entirely accurate. But to answer your question, Mr. Altamira, is that it's always been there that you could promise to the board that you do not have employees. And that would be what this proposal would do in a number of years. It would be to not allow licensees to make that promise anymore.
Okay, and just and that one of the audits that were performed, it looked about maybe estimated half of that within certain classifications maybe were not accurately reporting the situation. So am I interpreting correctly that, roughly 25% of our contractor base does have a valid exemption?
Well, that's correct that they filed the exemption, and the study though determined that a certain number of them had filed a false exemption. It's not to be, we don't want to say that there's others within the study that didn't also have a false exemption. It's just that we had to determine that they in fact did have employees. And that can be challenging unless you spend a lot of resources doing so. We did that by looking at their website, by talking to these contractors, by also going out to their job sites and determining for ourselves that they had workers.
Okay, I guess my concern there was, despite all that, there is still a large part of our contracting population that seems to be complying with all the laws that would be affected by this.
To answer your question, yeah, there is an unknown number of contractors who legitimately do not have employees. I don't know that we have that number. I don't know that would be difficult to obtain by looking at the exemptions.
To Board Member Altamira, I would just submit that there are some likely single person, sole proprietors going out doing some of the minor work that's out there. Just in my observations, especially in the classes that have been identified, there's none that I've seen the ability to pour any concrete with just one person as a C8 contractor. Never seen a one-person crew cutting down trees or doing HVAC, and that was in large part from the former board member, Mr. Diaz, his assistance in developing that C20 HVAC. So there are some, but I would be remiss to suggest that it's 25%. Those are just the ones that we haven't been able to catch in the process.
Mr. Albanese, I do have a member of the public would like to comment. JP Tenore, please go ahead with your comments for 3 minutes.
Well, before we do that, Frank,
yes,
did that answer your question or address your concern, or?
It addressed some of them. I guess in general, just while I have the floor, it just seemed like there were a lot of negatives. One, that seemed like the legislation didn't achieve its original goals. It seems like this is going to have a pretty significant reduction on the licensee population, drive more folks to the underground economy, which I know has been a concern. There's some obvious benefits to consumer protection. I guess I'm just unsure of how those items weigh out.
And I guess the only thing that I would suggest is, and certainly the other board members can comment, is if they're working with employees and don't have workers' compensation insurance, they're already working underground. And what's discouraging about that is that they're working underground under the appearance of not being underground and under the appearance of the legitimacy of a contractor's license when it's because they've falsified that exemption.
Mr. Albanese, would it be appropriate at this time to have a public comment?
Sure. Is that you good, Frank?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. We do have a member of the public, JP Tenori. Please go ahead with your comments.
Now, I'm wondering why in the world would you not have workers' comp when it's so cheap and so inexpensive? There's pay-as-you-go programs, and the ones that are not pay-as-you-go, you can get them as little as $500. I never listed my workers' comp just simply because it was in case it got switched or something was too much headache to update it. But I have workers' comp through the Hartford, and it can't be it's the most easiest process imaginable, and it's inexpensive, and a lot of people cheat and they independent contractor their employees. I don't. But I want to strongly encourage, for operations and stuff like that, it is so inexpensive to get. You should positively, definitely mandate workers' comp. There's no reason why not.
Okay, thank you for your comment. We do have one more member of the public that would like to comment as well. Greg Chick, please go ahead and make your comment.
Hi, thank you for the time and opportunity here. As a sole proprietor plumbing contractor who does service and repair work only, I do in fact do all my own work, and I never hire any help. And I haven't for decades. It takes restraint at times, but I do my own work. There is a way possibly to if you want to say, honor such a position as mine. And maybe if there was an online thing sent to people such as me monthly, a little statement. I hereby proclaim I do not hire anyone as a monthly reminder to people who otherwise might be tempted to, cheat the workman's comp thing, or some other creative idea such as that isn't going to be a burden on the CSLB to keep the honest people honest. There could be a task group set up to vet any possibilities and therefore avoid any, as some would say, big government imposition put on us people. I'm retiring, so myself, I don't care. I just care as an industry professional. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. We do have another public comment from Richard Markison. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, board members. Richard Markson on behalf of the Western Electrical Contractors Association, the Plumbing Heating Contractors of California. We certainly support the effort, but to the previous comments from the sole practitioner, yeah, we're certainly sensitive to that. There are instances, if you are a sole practitioner and you have other forms of health insurance, the workers' compensation insurance may be redundant, may be duplicative, and so there could be legitimate reasons. Certainly, neither of my clients countenance or support the situations that have been described where contractors are either involved in cash pay or are not covering their employees. But a true sole practitioner may end up and may believe that it is duplicative coverage that offers no value. That said, WICA and PHCC both support this effort for the industry. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We see that Phil Vermeulen's hand's still up. I'm not sure if that's from a previous one or not. Phil, did you have another comment to make?
Sorry, I thought I had turned it off. I apologize.
Okay, no problem. Okay, we do, if it's appropriate, we do have one other comment. One person who did comment before would like to add something. JP Tenori, if you can just please keep this comment short.
Okay. Basically, I haven't had any employees for several months out of this year. And I don't mind paying the Hartford, I think they debited $16 and something cents just to keep the policy active. And I'm not really, like the purpose of building a company is to not necessarily just be a one-man show. And there's a lot of people who take advantage of it. And I say the cost outweighs the benefit outweighs the cost of actually having workers' comp. So you can get it as low as like $50 a month, or sometimes $500 at most. And for the level of work that you have to do, it's there's license fees and stuff like that. It's just the cost of doing business, and to protect the people that are working, to protect the homeowners, because they're liable if they don't have workers' comp if someone gets hurt on their property and stuff. So I positively strongly support having workers' comp.
All right, thank you very much. No other public comments at this point.
All right, if there's no other public comments or board comments, I will turn it over to Felice, and please call roll on the motion.
David Dellatore,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamira,
Aye.
Lucky Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giartano,
Aye.
Susan Granzella,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Marla Richardson,
Aye.
Jim Mullane,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Aye.
Mary Teichert.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Outstanding. That concludes, on a very positive note, the Enforcement Committee update. Thank you, everybody. So I turn it back over to Chair De La Torre.
Thank you, Kevin, Tracy, and Dave for your updated reports. As Kevin said, that concludes the enforcement section of the agenda. We move to agenda item F, the licensing and testing portion of our agenda, which begins on page 113. I turn it over to Licensing Committee Chair Jim Rain and Licensing Chief Justin Pata.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning, Board. You can find, as David said, the licensing update on page 113. I will highlight a few items for the Board. Regarding applications, in the early months of the pandemic, new applications were low. They are now increasing but remain below 2019 levels. Please note that processing times are increasing due to the number of vacancies and many licensing staff working part-time to assist their children with distance learning. Regarding renewals, our licensed population is holding relatively steady, and the division recently hired 2 new staff to process renewal applications. Although processing times early in the pandemic were high, they are continuing to decrease and are holding between 2 and 3 weeks at present. Our total number of renewals received still remains high each month despite the pandemic. And finally, the call center is where the division was most impacted. Call wait times remain high, but IT staff along with the division are finalizing a means for staff to answer the phone while teleworking. This is anticipated to go into effect October 1st and is expected to return call center wait times to pre-pandemic norms. In other words, we are striving to return to when the average wait time for a caller was under 6 minutes. Staff continues to promptly answer emails sent to the CSLB licensing staff, and I'm happy to report that those are still being consistently answered within 24 hours. You can find the testing update on page 129. As previously discussed, on June 15th, staff reopened 7 of its 8 test centers. At the time, there were over 10,000 exams scheduled. By operating most test centers after hours, I'm happy to report that the total number of pending exams is now below 7,000. For reference, during normal operations, CSLB usually has 4,500 pending exams at any given time, and the plan is to further reduce pending applications to less than 4,500 by the end of the year. For the public listening today, if an applicant has an exam scheduled and they would like to try to take their exam sooner, please email exams@cslb.ca.gov. Staff are often able to find earlier test dates if applicants are willing to go to a different test facility than the one they were assigned to. And finally, in September, the Exam Development Unit is beginning to hold remote workshops to continue occupational analysis work for the updating existing exams. On page 130, you can see the exam staff are currently working on. Staff will also begin work on developing the new residential remodeling contractor exam. That concludes the licensing and testing update, and Justin is available if the board has any questions. Do board members have any questions or comments? Okay, Rick, does anyone from the public have any comments?
No public comments on this item.
All right, thank you. Next item is the review of the internal policy and procedure changes related to license application review. You can find the information on page 135 for the internal policy and procedure changes related to license application review. CSLB currently reviews the stated experience in 3% of the applications it receives. At different times in the board's history, the licensing and enforcement divisions have performed this function. But recently, the licensing division has conducted these reviews. But due to the pandemic, the division redirected these staff to work on more complex applications and referred these reviews to the enforcement division. Management is tracking how this is working, and after operations return to normal, it will present to the board on whether this function should remain in licensing or instead, once again, be performed by the enforcement division. Any comments or questions from the board? Rick, anyone from the public?
No comments.
Okay. Our next item is an action item, review, discussion, and possible action on canceling the CSLB license reciprocity agreement with Utah. Moving to item 4 is the review of the CSLB licensing reciprocity agreement with Utah. You can find this item on page 139. At our previous meeting with the Nevada board, CSLB discovered that the Nevada board removed Utah from its licensure and endorsement program on April 16, 2020. This was due to legislation passed in Utah. Board member Frank Altamura asked staff to look into this matter. And Justin, can you please share what staff found?
Thank you, Jim. This is Justin. So just by way of background, to honor reciprocity with any given state, we're charged under Business and Professions Code 7065.4 to essentially evaluate whether the licensure requirements of that state are the same or greater as what's required in California. So with that in mind, in 2019, Utah passed House Bill 187, which eliminated the trade exam requirement for general contractors, general engineering contractors, and specialty contractors. So no more trade exams for any type of contractor's license in Utah. And then in 2020, they actually passed some additional legislation, which was, I believe it's Senate Bill 23, and that actually allows contractors, as long as they have a licensing in good standing for 1 year in another state, then they're able to get a license in Utah. And just by way of background, when it comes to reciprocity, we're looking at 5 years good standing in another state. That's just a brief summary. Happy to go into more detail if anyone has questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Justin? Okay, based on the Nevada board's actions and what staff researched, I would like to ask the board to consider the following motion. Direct staff to rescind its license reciprocity agreement with the state of Utah. Would someone like to make a motion and a second?
This is Johnny. I would make that motion.
Second, this is Susan.
Yep, motion and a second. Is there anything on the question? Any board comment? Rick, is there any public comment?
No public comment on this motion.
Thank you. Feliz, will you please call the roll?
David Deltari,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Frank Altamura,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Miguel Galarza,
Aye.
Don Giordano,
Aye.
Susan Granzola,
Aye.
Diana Love,
Aye.
Paula Richardson,
Aye.
Jim Lane, Jim,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Nancy Springer,
Yes.
Mary Tykert.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next is item number 5, the possible action to initiate rulemaking to establish criteria for expediting review of license applications. And you can find this item on page 143. Recently, staff reviewed policies associated with expediting applications. In other words, when staff takes an application out of the order it was received and processes it immediately. In their review, staff uncovered an issue and would like to make a proposal to the board. Justin?
Thank you, Jim. Just briefly, under Business and Professions Code, Section 7137, the board has been authorized by regulation to allow for the expedites of applications. Unfortunately, when we were doing our research, I just realized that we actually don't have any regulations. We do have an internal policy, and I just wanted to briefly summarize that policy for the board. And what staff will be doing next without objection would be just putting a regulatory package together for review at the licensing committee in early November, and then we would present to the full board if it wasn't disagreement in December. And what we would be doing is just writing reg language to this effect, which is our existing policy. We expedite any application, which means when it actually comes in the door, we're going to move you to the front of the line if you meet one of these criteria. The first is you're attempting to perform work in a declared disaster area. A classic example that was raised on the call already, City of Paradise. A second one is if you're trying to work on any energy conservation project or any work with a public utility, whether that's an investor-owned utility or a privately owned utility. And then last but not least, and the one that's most common that I see on a regular basis each week, would be if you're trying to perform work on a public contract. So that's just a brief summary of what we're looking to do. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay. The board does not need to take any formal position at this time, but staff is asking for any feedback we may have. In the coming weeks, they will prepare draft regulatory language based on the existing policy and our feedback, and we'll present that language to the licensing and legislative committees in October. With that, do board members have any questions or comments? Rick, anything from the public?
First, it appears Frank Altamore just raised his hand. He may have a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm wondering if staff might be able to clarify why this needs to be formalized.
At present, and I'll be a little bit soft with my language, Jason may want to step in. I just determined that while we're implementing this policy, we actually have a state law that's seeking that we have such a policy and regulation. So I just want to make sure we're adhering with state law. Jason Hurtado, is there anything you'd want to add on that point?
Yeah.
I assume he may be having technical issues, but if I get a text from him, I'll let you know. But otherwise, essentially, what we're attempting to do here is just making sure we're adhering with our statute.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, sorry, Jason.
Oh, so sorry about that. I'm having some difficulty. So I think, as you mentioned earlier, it is sort of statutorily required, I think, under 7137, that if we're going to expedite these, it's sort of best to implement this through the promulgation of regulations. So I think that's probably the proper course of action here going forward.
Anybody from the public?
First of all, it appears that Miguel Galarza has a comment as well, board member.
Yes, question to staff. Does that apply to new licenses for public works, or is that for additional classifications and or for both?
You're correct on the last item. It's for both. So it could be, I would say the most common when it comes to public works is an add class, just because somebody changed the bid, but I also see new applications quite frequently. So it's for both.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we do have a couple of comments from the public. First, JP Tenor has a comment. Stand by just 1 second. And okay, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just making a comment that it's all declared a disaster area right now. Does that count as a disaster area with respect to the first point? I don't know. That's not really a relevant thing right now, but technically it's all disaster area.
It's actually a formalized process that can be done under two circumstances. I don't want to go into too much down the rabbit hole, but a FEMA declared disaster area or something declared as a disaster by the governor of California.
Thank you. We have one other public comment from Phil Vermeulen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Phil Vermeulen, representing Contractor Licensing Center and Flasher Barricade Association. This is something that I have a lot of experience with, and there are these extenuating circumstances when an application has to be processed more quickly. I should also point out that the Secretary of State has an expedite process for $350. They will put you and process your incorporation within 24 hours. It makes lots of good sense with the state, with the Contractors Board being in such a bad financial straits now. It's another opportunity to make some money and assist those companies that are willing to front the additional funds to help to get the thing processed more quickly. Again, it's just good business practice, and I would strongly urge this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that our legal counsel, Jason Hurtado, has his hand up.
Oh, just a quick question for Justin. So with respect to the military families under Business and Professions Code section, I think 115.4 and 115.5, will this proposal also incorporate sort of those statutory requirements to expedite as well? Or is that something that staff is looking sort of later on down the line?
That's actually a great dovetail to Phil Vermeulen's comment as well. My understanding, based on conversations with several folks, are the military expedites aren't necessary in these regulations because we essentially execute that per statute already. So I wasn't planning to add that language, but based on conversations I can have with Jason offline, if that's necessary, I'm happy to add that to the regulatory language. And then in addition to that, with regard to Phil Vermeulen's comment, when it comes to expediting by paying a fee, that's certainly something we're looking into at the staff level. That also would require a statutory change. So we're actually looping in that discussion into our fee study. Hopefully that answers questions.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no other public comments at this point.